Alright, so here we are the next day, back out to the 2 coil pots that we started yesterday. So I basically just kept adding and adding coils, and then I smoothed them out and did a lot of smoothing and melded everything as one, but it didn't totally get rid of the evidence of the coils. So it still has that earthy handmade look to it. They did not dry out as fast as I had hoped they would. So this one is still pretty soft. So what I did was I turned it upside down to try to get the bottom to dry out a little bit, because we want the bottom to dry out faster than the rim in case we want to add anything to the rim. So we're going to talk about some next steps that we can do to finish off our coil pots or bowls. You can see that I did not end up doing the sort of Grecian vessel that I had originally planned, the sort of urn shape, and decided to do more of an open bowl. So it was actually a little bit more open, like a platter, and I wanted it to come in more. And once you've stretched the clay out, you can't really push it back in. So what I did was I took a needle tool, which you can also use your paper clip, and I cut a couple slits like that, and then on the other side like that, and I basically cut out a V shape like that, and then took the two sides of the V and scored and slipped them together, and that brought my rim in. So that's just another technique that you can use. You can see that because of the weight of the coils, the pot has a tendency to want to get really flat on the bottom. So even this one, even though we started out with a pinch pot that was round, it got really flat on the bottom, just like this one. So I turned it upside down and kind of pushed my fist into the underside to round it back out again. So let's set this one aside. It's still a little bit too wet. If I were to put a foot or a base on it, it might just crush under the weight of me working on it. So it still needs to harden up a little bit. So let's just go here and talk a little bit about what our options are. So we're going to look in this book. It's called Pinch Pottery by Susan Halls. And I really like this book because it shows how you can make everything by hand that you could with a wheel, and it's very clear and basic. So see the different options for the rims. You can do a scalloped rim, which this is kind of a scalloped rim where I just took my fingers and made the indent on the rim. This one is called the ripple edge, which you would do more by taking your thumb and your hand, your fingers like this, and pressing the rim like that to create a ripple edge. You can see how this bowl and this one have a rim, so that could be added by adding an extra coil and then pushing it out so that you have an outer rim. And then other options would be just a frayed edge, very natural, or a cut edge. If you do something like this, you want to think about what you want to use your bowl for. Do you want it just to be an art piece, or do you want to eat your cereal out of it? And here's an example of a pierced edge where they actually cut little holes or little designs into the edge of the bowl. So you can see all these different designs, and I want you to feel free to look on the internet for ideas. and get a feel for the different possibilities. Now, like I said, it's not copying, it's more like being inspired, because you might not even realize what the possibilities are if you don't look and see what other people are making. So this one was actually cut to have a ripple edge. This one, they kind of took their pot when it was still soft and smushed it from the sides to give it like an oval shape. And then this one has some little feet on it. So when you are looking at other pieces of work on the internet, I want you to go more for inspiration and seeing what's possible, and don't get too caught up in the how-tos or the tools that are needed. As you can see, we have done a lot with pretty much no tools at all. And you can get caught up in perfection. What I want you to do is find things that you are inspired to make, and then say, how are those things made out of the things I already know how to make? So you already know how to make a pinch pot, you already know how to make a slab, you already know how to make a cylinder, you already know how to make a coil bowl. So all those things can be combined to create the forms you want. So here you have kind of a cylinder attached to a bowl, or pinch pots attached to a larger coil bowl. And all these structures will be used when you come to the time when you want to make sculpture or a figure or something like that. So what we're going to talk about next is how to make foots and rings or bases. So these are different types of foots. Now you may not have even thought about doing that to your bowl. You can see that like this one, it doesn't have a foot or a base, and that's fine. It doesn't have to. But you can add a touch of detail. This one is called a cut out foot. So what I did was I didn't add one, I took a tool and carved out a circle. Now what that did was it made this rim the foot. So this part is making contact with the shelf and the kiln, and that means this part can be glazed and it won't stick. So wherever it's touching the shelf and the kiln, it cannot be glazed. So if you start looking around at the bowls that you have in your house at home, you're going to see that most of them do have a foot ring of some kind. And all of these are handmade pieces that either friends have made, or you can even find some really good artwork at Goodwill. But they all have these little rings at the bottom. And we're going to go over that and show how you can do that. But remember, you can also add feet. These were little balls that I rolled and then scored and slipped onto the bottom. They call this style nodule feet, where you kind of pull it out like a foot. You could even do like a claw foot, you know, like you've got little claw feet on this little planter. This was a mug I made in college. It has little alligator feet and a tail. So I just don't want you to feel limited in your possibilities. Just because I'm doing one thing on the video doesn't mean you have to do the exact same thing. You just want to use the techniques that I'm using to make whatever it is you really want to make. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to try doing a simple coiled ring foot like this. Now they talk about also a donut foot, which has kind of a blobby, puffed out look, where they took a pinch pot stuck it on, and then pushed it in the middle. Now, if you do something like that, you have to poke a hole to let any trapped air out. Just fair warning. Remember, we don't want any trapped air. So I'm going to get my clay that I have under a damp rag, and I'm going to make a sausage, start rolling my coil, and the coil has to be at least the diameter of the base of the pot. In this case, since the pot is very rounded, it doesn't really matter. And what this is going to do is not just give it a more finished, more professional look, but it's also going to make it more stable. So you can have a bowl that just rests on its base. It's going to be more wobbly than one that has a nice ring foot or feet. And so you always want to think, you know, about the practicality of your end product as well. So it started to flatten out, so I'm gonna square it off. Keep rolling. I think it's too big, so I'm just gonna take that off. Keep going. I think I can take a little bit more off. Okay, now I'm going to put this on. I'm going to take some time to look at it from this angle as well. So one thing about turning it over is that it allows me to get an idea of what my overall shape was. So it needs to be a little bit more over here. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is take a pencil or a wire tool or even some water. Make sure that this is centered. And I'm just going to make a very light tracing around the edge. I'm going to set this like this. Now we're going to score and slip. Now I'm going to put a lot of slip. I really want to get a good connection, but I don't want to have to press too hard to get that connection because I don't want to crush my ball. It's not quite as hard as I would have liked it to be. I'm gonna use this moment to really connect these. Kind of wiggling it, pushing, making sure there is a section. Now this clay is pretty soft. If it were too hard, I might have to press too hard to get it to do what I want it to do, and I want to be really careful. Now one thing you could do is you could make a form. You could use a form to go underneath your ball. So you could take like a bigger bowl, or I'm sorry, a smaller bowl, and put it underneath here. But if you do that, you want to put like a piece of paper over it or like a dry cloth. I tend to shy students away from doing that too early because they have a tendency to get their pieces stuck to the form. So you can, for example, roll a slab and just stick it inside of a bowl and try to use the bowl almost like a mold. It's technically not a mold because you're not like pouring it in there, you're more like forming it over top of the bowl, but you always have to be careful that you don't get it stuck. You could even like crumple up some newspaper and put it under here while it's drying if you were afraid it was sagging, just to give it some support while it dries, and then once it dries it'll be strong. Now what I'm going to do is roll the tiny little snake, just like we've done in the past. Just add some into the crevice there. Just makes the connection a little bit stronger. It's not a totally necessary step if you have a good connection already. And maybe you like that look where it's real obvious that it's a coil and you can see the original connection. Okay. Now what I'm gonna do is take my fingers, and I don't want to smush the coil, but I want to smooth it and give it almost a straight side, and I'm gonna do like this. Now you might notice in some of the books they have like little turntables so that they can just constantly kind of turn and everything to a different angle. But you can see that if you just have a piece of wood or a board, pie sheet, that you can just turn your piece of wood. So you don't have to have all those extra tools. Okay. I'm going to take the time to smooth it out. Get your fingers a little bit wet, but remember when your fingers are wet, you're just kind of running along the surface and smoothing out tiny imperfections, but you need your fingers to be a little bit dry to be able to pull clay from high points to low points and really have an effect. Okay. Looks a little bit higher on one side than the other. I'm going to flip it over and see how it sets. There you go. Now another trick that you can use if you feel like your bowl is not level is you can take a knife or a wire tool and you can shave off some of the rim and just try to get it to be all level on the top. Alright. Now I could add an extra coil now and to make a rim that if I wanted it to flange out. But I think I want to try the ripple edge. So I'm gonna take one finger pushing in and these two fingers pushing out. Now this is kind of a traditional edge that you might have seen on like some flower pots. A lot of like Italian flower pots have this. It's kind of like a pie, like making a pie crust in a way. You want to try to stay consistent as you can all the way around. Kind of makes it look like a flower. Now I could add pattern if I wanted to at this point. I could add stamps to the inside if I wanted to make it look like a flower. But I think I'm pretty happy with it like that. So the last step, of course, I'm going to turn it over and I'll set it real gently. I want to crush what I've just done. And I'm going to sign my name. Don't forget to sign your name. urn shape or like a closed, you can do mugs, you can make more like a closed jar shape, you can do a vase shape. So all of these things are made with coils. So here they brought it back in and then made a lid and made different kinds of jars. So it's the basic, still the basic concept, the same thing that we did, but just different possibilities. And I can't wait to see what you guys have made, and let me know if you need any more clay or if you have any more questions. I'll see you later. Bye-bye. All right, so we are back at Studio Magnolia, and we are still grateful as ever for the rain. And I'll let you see how everything turned out. It's finally hard enough now that I can pick it up and not really lose any shape. So I ended up using my finger and just pushing some scalloped edges. And what I did for the bottom is I carved out the foot so that its foot ring was carved rather than added on. You can see how as I carved away, the scrape marks also leave kind of a nice texture that looks intentional. So you don't always have to hide the evidence of your work. So that one's decent size, and then we have our ruffled edge and our footer. And you know, I decided that the smaller proportion was better, so you're always thinking about the proportions, and don't forget to step back and get an overall look at your piece throughout the time you're working on it, so that you know, don't lose the forest for the trees. You always got to kind of look back and how does the overall shape look like? Don't get too distracted by the details. All right, that is your coil bowl project. I will see you all on the other side.